Good afternoon. Welcome back to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain. And this afternoon on Cool Our Heels with Lillian, our special guest is John Barry Jr., who is going to discuss with us the pandemic, what it's doing to our legal system, and also possibly what it's doing to the veterans, because he himself is a veteran. So good afternoon, John. Could you just share a little bit of your background so our viewers can understand where you're coming from?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Lillian. I am a veteran. I served in both active duty and in the reserve component. I served over 20 years. I retired as a lieutenant colonel. I started off as an infantry officer and then moved through different branches, but I had a great time and think it was probably the best decision I ever made. I look back on those 20 years, 2 deployments, and tons of friends. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. I'm now an attorney. My father started the firm back in 1965. He was a Vietnam veteran, served 3 tours in Vietnam. He defended the commander of the 5th Special Forces in a murder trial. Won that case. That kind of made him famous in the legal community. He was out trying murder cases, and he came across a reoccurring theme, which was that veterans needed legal help, and they needed help getting disability compensation from the VA from something that was not yet called PTSD. And so my dad started raising veteran awareness and started our veterans practice. Now, he still was an amazing trial lawyer, but he's the one that developed this practice that has allowed us to help our nation's heroes get the benefits they've earned.
Which really makes a difference. My grandfather served in both World War I, World War II, and he was rather a large gentleman. He was over 6'4", and he also served as provost marshal in the Philippines during World War II, and then he was in military police, so he's head security for the Manhattan Project. So if I want to make a simple atomic bomb, I can do that. However, lucky for the rest of the world, I am not interested in self-destruction. So those papers and his medals are safe for me. His grandson now is in possession of everything. However, we're here to talk about what you see is going on in our legal system and what the coronavirus is doing to the legal system, since it seems to do everything else to our economy and the stock market and our health system. So why not also settle into our legal system? What is the biggest single problem that you see that's happening because of the C virus?
Well, the biggest problem was that some courts ground to a halt, right? So the place we as Americans go to get justice is the court system. And when the court system's shut, then everything stops and people can't move on with their lives, right? Whether someone's been seriously injured and it's not their fault, or they've been charged with a crime, or they have a contract dispute, right? We go to the legal system to sort things out. And when things don't get sorted, they just hang out there. And for a lot of people, that creates a lot of anxiety. We have a 6th Amendment right to a speedy and public trial. And what's happened is when the courts slow down, stop, people don't get that speedy trial right. And the speedy trial right is extremely important. Our forefathers knew that if someone is charged with a crime, they need to have the opportunity to call witnesses in their defense, and that over time, witnesses can disappear, their memories can fade, and evidence can disappear. And so as COVID hit, it slowed everything down in the court system. Some court systems grinded to a complete halt. And it left everybody wondering what is going to happen with these legal matters. And look, most people don't come to our law office because their lives are great, right? They usually come to see a lawyer because they have a problem and they want the problem solved. When that problem isn't solved, it weighs on them. The other issue that it develops, Lillian, is our 6th Amendment right to a public trial. A lot of the courtrooms that are open now, if you're fortunate enough to be in a jurisdiction where the courtrooms are open, you'll find that they're generally closed off to the public. And someone charged with a crime or going through a serious civil case may want to have support in the courtroom. They may want to have family members or people that are there, because for a lot of people, that legal problem is the most important problem in their life, and they need that support there, but they're closed off to that. Now, the courts have found a way around that by using live stream in the courtrooms and other things, but it has been very difficult for people who have legal problems to resolve them.
So I'm just surprised that our legal system did not have a contingency plan set up for when something happens, because things do happen in any given day and any given year, and it doesn't have to be a pandemic to bring a court system down. So I'm somewhat surprised that they didn't have something in reserve for just in case.
Right, and I think the federal courts were a little bit better prepared than the state courts. There had been a lot more of this type of thing in federal courts. But I will tell you one court system that I'm extremely proud of, and that's the Veterans Court. The Board of Veterans Appeals in D.C. and the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims have continued to work. The board was having Skype hearings long before COVID hit, and so veterans can continue to get hearings, and the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims has continued. In fact, they issued this magnificent order when everything hit and said, look, we're remote. COVID is not an excuse, right? Because their concern is veterans, by the time their cases get to the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, those cases have been around for several years. And those veterans have been waiting for justice. And as they say, justice delayed is justice denied.
So if you're a person who has experienced a problem and you need to go to trial for whatever the reason, if you can't have a plea agreement, no, I'm not going to recite everything on TV because you already know it. But if a person needed to get to court for whatever the reason, whether getting divorced or somebody ran their kid over on the bike or a complaint, how does somebody break through what's going on now to make sure that they at least get heard?
That's a great question that doesn't really have an answer. I mean, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, it's different. Some courts are open, some are not. As we sit across from each other on the screen, right, we don't have, I think it's harder to resolve an argument, right? In courts, we're forced to resolve the arguments. But as we distance from each other, if you and I are in a room, Lillian, we can be human, we can talk, and we can resolve things. And that's what mediators do sometimes. That's how we resolve things outside of the court system. And maybe we can do that. But we're less likely to do that on a Zoom call or via email, right? So the fact that we're social distancing and the courts are closed, there are problems that are not being resolved. Now, that's probably one of the reasons why we're seeing so many issues with mental health right now, is that people have unresolved issues. They're feeling helpless because they can't get them resolved. They're stuck at home, and this problem is just looming, and they can't resolve it.
I'm wondering, when a person's in jail, do they have any rights at all? Because I understand that a lot of the prisons now, they do have the coronaviruses inside the prison. So are the people that are incarcerated, do they have any rights to protect themselves with it all, or are they just going to be one pool of guinea pigs?
Well, I guess let me go back and amend my answer to an earlier question, which was talking about the Sixth Amendment rights. One of the other parts of the speedy trial is that if you're incarcerated, right, you need that, because there are people who are incarcerated waiting for trial. Let's say, Lillian, you're charged with murder, right? And you're not going to get bond set. So you're gonna, or if you have bond, it's going to be, several $1 million. And so you're sitting there in jail waiting for your trial. Then bam, COVID hits, and your trial date has been taken off the docket, and you don't know when you're going to trial, right? So there are a lot of people who are in jail right now who are in limbo, and part of the speedy trial right was to protect us, in that pre-trial detention, that it doesn't last forever, that you aren't held for years and years and years before you get a trial. Now, that being said, do prisoners have rights? Yeah, absolutely, they have rights. And there are attorneys that sue prisons for violating prisoners' civil rights. Obviously, you're not going to have the same freedoms in prison as you're going to have when you're not in prison. But prisoners do have rights, and yeah, it's scary. And we've seen in the legal community, especially in the white collar community, where you have some elderly people who have been incarcerated for nonviolent crimes, and they're concerned because COVID infections, once they hit a place like a jail, they can spread like wildfire. And we know that our elderly are much more susceptible.
Absolutely. So I guess that would also be applied to any nursing homes where the people are maybe having somebody else who's a power attorney to them, but they still have their basic rights to protect them.
Absolutely. Now it's a very scary situation because we've seen several outbreaks in nursing homes, and we've seen that our elderly population has been put at risk. And I think you're going to see a lot of lawsuits come out of that because people didn't take precautions. It's unfortunate when these things happen because we are talking about people's relatives dying, right? And a lot of times it was the family members who chose that residence for that,
yes,
the guilt associated with that.
Yeah, we had a facility in Pennsylvania where the National Guard had to go in and get the residents out and everything, and it was considered a number one facility. Did a cost of $14,000 to $16,000 a month. That's a lot of money to pour down the drain and have your loved one get sick at the same time because they don't last very long in that respect. Because I know that there are a lot of people who wonder what their rights are during a pandemic because so many other types of rights seem to be being pushed aside about what they can do, about what they can't do, especially when it comes to wearing the masks and keeping themselves social distancing. And since there's no national mandate to do any of that stuff, nobody's really paying attention.
Well, and we have seen local government set certain standards, and some local governments have said, yes, you are going to wear a mask, and we're going to write you a big ticket, $500 or whatever it is, if you're caught in public not wearing a mask. Now, the other side of that is there have been people who say, well, I have a constitutional right to wear a mask in Home Depot or whatever the store is, right? Or to not wear a mask. And that's not true, right? This is America. Business owners can decide the standards of their establishments. They can say you must wear a shirt, you must wear shoes, you must wear a mask. And if you don't believe with them, that's fine. You can walk away and say, you know what, I'm not going to go into a store that requires me to wear a mask. Or you, as the consumer, could say, you know what, if people aren't wearing masks there, I don't feel safe, and I'm not going into that establishment. So it's fine. There's no right to not wear a mask, but certainly, like I said, because private businesses can set those standards. Now, when we start talking about government buildings and public places, the analysis is a little bit different. But in terms of can a mayor say that people have to wear masks in public? Well, it's happening.
I know. And I'm just wondering, too, when the states may bring in their own division of the National Guard to protect who comes in and out of their states, because there's a lot of, I would say, word warfare between Maryland and New Jersey at the moment as to being on the list and then being taken off the list and then being put back on again. So we're talking about all types of rights in that respect. I guess states' rights versus what?
Yeah, well, that's been interesting. You're right, because at the beginning of this, right, there were states, I think it was maybe Florida, that didn't want New Yorkers to come to their state, right? They didn't want them. And so a division amongst the states and their rights. And of course, and now since this is kind of quieted down in Europe, the Europeans don't want the Americans to come over there.
No, Europe says no, England says no, all the countries over there are very firm. No nationals, no American nationals. And you're going, national? I'm a national? Really? You only think of yourselves that way. And yet we do seem to have this overplay about who has the right and which right is stronger or more enforceable than the other types of rights. I mean, I hear a lot of it in the community in which I live. I live in a senior community, and a lot of the seniors have reported to the director of the community, to the state attorney general, for violating their rights for not being allowed to see their families or not being allowed to leave the campus. So I find it fascinating when people talk about their rights, because there seems to be there are different levels of rights and what you can do within the rights that have been assigned to you or what you can use.
Yeah, you have to balance those rights with safety. I mean, you think about the right to a public trial, right? And the purpose for that is, of course, to hold the government and the judiciary accountable. We don't want trials behind closed doors, right? So there is a right to a public trial. But what does that mean? And there's a balancing test. We have to say, well, what are the rights of the public, but also let's talk about the interests of justice and the protection of our people. I mean, it's a very difficult question. And unfortunately, everybody seems to think that they're an expert on it, right? And so we have all these people commenting on it, but the reality is it always is very specific to that situation. And as an Army officer, we had to make risk assessments every day, right? You can't just eliminate risk. You have to assess risk, you have to mitigate risk, but as a leader, you are always taking risks. And the question becomes, where do you take the risk? And where do where do those rights line up on that, right? Is someone's right so important that they can then put other people at risk? Or is it the people at risk who need to be taking responsibility so that other people can exercise their rights? This is the dialogue that goes back and forth. And it's interesting to hear what people have to say. But at the end of the day, it's the person on the ground, the commander on the ground, who has to make that decision, decide what is best for his or her organization.
And follow it through to its logical conclusion, whether it's good, bad, or indifference, and deal with it afterwards, because you can't tiptoe around any situation. You have to be responsible for the risks that you're going to take.
Yeah, leaders need to be decisive. And you know what?
Yes.
Sometimes as a leader, you make a bad decision, and then you have to own that, and you have to go back and fix it. But yes, I think now is a time where we need decisive leadership. Absolutely.
That's what I believe too. So, John, could you please tell everybody where they can find you on the World Wide Web and how they can get in touch with you? Because I noticed that you go out and give several speeches on different topics, which I think is terrific. And I really think one of them should be explaining the Constitution and the amendments and the rights wherein you get from those amendments, because I don't think a lot of people really understand the fine tuning or the details that come along with those amendments.
Thank you. Well, it's interesting. I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States as a soldier, and as a lawyer, you take a similar oath. And so, we still support and defend the Constitution, but one client at a time. For our national veterans law practice, where we help veterans get the disability benefits that they've earned, you can find us at ptsdlawyers.com, as in post-traumatic stress disorder lawyers.com. So ptsdlawyers.com, or 1-888-883-2483. And like I said, we represent veterans nationwide. We have veteran clients in every state. And what we do is we help veterans appeal disability decisions. Now, if you're in the Midwest, we also try cases, right? We also like to be involved in that part of the judicial system as well. But, we never stopped serving. We took the uniform off. We still support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And we love representing our nation's heroes, our veterans.
We should. They put their lives on the line for us, and not many people are called to do that type of work, because it really takes a different type of perspective and responsibility that not everybody has within them to go out and do it.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, once you do it, the rewards are immense, right? There is nothing better than serving with a group of like-minded men and women who are just champions of a cause, right? Those that were willing to die for our rights. There's no greater honor than to be a part of that group.
Absolutely. So, ladies and gentlemen, and adults of all ages, thank you very much for joining us today. You can see and listen to John Barry's interview with Lillian Caldwell all over again on youtube.com/PWR Network LLC _ Talk Radio. Also at https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. I want to thank everyone very much for joining us this morning. Thank you very much, John, for appearing on Cool Your Heels with Lillian, and everyone else, stay safe.
Thank you, Lillian.